That generous foe of mine, Egolaf, indeed I should not call him my friend, as he named me once, had set 2 months as the time in which I must bide in peace, and I will not say that this space seemed likely to go over heavily for me. We could hear little news except from such ships as put in from along the coast, and the first news that came was when Godwine returned from Bosham. The Danes had taken the Queen to Winchester in high honor, and there she was living in some sort of state, which pleased her well enough, until word came from Nut concerning her. It was thought that he would let her go back to Normandy, keeping the Athelings as hostages. So concerning her and them my mind was at rest. Now Nut was besieging London. But before he had left Wessex, there had been a great council of bishops and clergy at Salisbury, and at that gathering he had been chosen as king in succession to Ethelred, whose house was not loved. There, too, he was present, and swore to be their faithful king and to protect Holy Church in all things. Then into Wessex went Edmund, ravaging and laying waste there. One might know what hatred of him would come from that, and my heart sank at hearing this folly. 2 days after Godwine came, we saw the sails of a great fleet going westward, and we thought that Nut had been beaten off from London. But a ship that had sprung a leak in some way put into Wolfnutha's haven at Shoreham from this fleet, and from thence we learnt that the Danes had halved their forces, and that Nut and Ulf the Jarl were going again into the Severn to withstand Edmund in Wessex, and if possible to hem him in between 2 forces in the old way of the days of Alfred. London was beset straitly, but not taken yet. I was more content then, for I could not have reached our king, had I returned from Normandy, as it seemed. And now it was possible that he might make headway against the divided forces of the Danes. I might join him yet in time to share in some final victory. So the early summer days at Penhest became very pleasant to me, for I had little care that need sit heavily on my mind. Indeed, I think that I should almost have forgotten that I had any, but for the foolishness of Sexburga, which bid fair to turn all things to sadness at one time. I had spoken with her mother about my search for Hertha, telling her plainly all that had passed between me and Aylwin, and I asked her to tell me what she thought I must do now. Wait yet longer, she answered, peace will come, and he will bring Hertha back to Bears. That ought to have been my own plan, but I had rather hoped to hear her say that I was right in holding myself free to choose afresh as I would. The thought of being bound seemed irksome to me, though why I, landless and luckless, should have found it so, I could not say. It mattered not at all at present. So I said, that is all one can do, lady, it matters not. What thinks Sexburga? I asked presently. You have not spoken to her of your search, then, the lady said. I had thought that she would ask you of it first of all. She had asked nothing, and I had said nothing. Then the lady said, she and I spoke thereof with Aldra but yesterday, and they were both full of your praises for wishing to seek for your Hertha. They will be glad to hear that you have done so, and sad that you have failed to find her. Then there came over me a wish that Aldra knew not about it. And that angered me with myself, because it was plain that I cared overmuch for the company and pleasant voice and looks of this maiden who was friendless as I. So that was all that was said at the time, and I met Aldra in my foolishness as if this were going to make some difference in her way with me. Which of course it did not. Whereupon I was angrier yet with myself for deeming that it would. Now, there was another person who should have known of this betrothal of mine, and that was Edred, but Sexburga never told him, and her mother did not, for she thought that Sexburga would do so. Of all the foolish things that a maiden can do, the most foolish is to try to make the man who is to wed her jealous. For it is playing with edged tools in 2 ways. If the man, being an honest man and trustful, is not jealous, the maiden thinks that he cares not, and so is herself wretched. But if he is jealous, why, then every thought of his towards the maiden is changed and spoilt, and it will be long, if ever, before full trust is won again between those two. But this seems to be good sport to some damsels, and so it was with Sexburga. The blacker grew the young thane's looks the more she would praise me, and the more she would choose to speak with me rather than to him, wherefore his life was made wretched for him, and I think he hated the sight of me. Maybe I was blind not to see this, but I liked him well enough, save for what I thought was his sullen temper, and I would try to joke him into better humor at times in all good fellowship. But I think that the trouble began before I came back, with talk of the time when I had been at Penhost before. He was ever at Penhost. I should have thought ill of him if he had not been, for Dollington was close at hand, and he was ever welcome. After that talk with the lady, I must needs ask Sexburga what she thought concerning my strange betrothal, she having had so much to say thereon before. And so one day, as I had been with Spray to see some traps set by the bank of the Ashbourne River for otter, and was coming back with him, bearing a great one between us on a pole, we met Sexburga in the woodland track to the house, and Spray went on, while I walked back with her on her way to the old village where we had had the fight and talked about my baffled search. Now her saying was that I had no need to pay any more heed to this betrothal after what I had said to Aylwin, and that he himself would seem to try to break it by thus taking Hertha out of my ken. And we talked freely of the matter, and the last thing that I said was this, coming round to what I had made up my better mind for. It is not much matter either way. I can think of no maiden as things are. Whereon we met Eldred, and his face was not pleasant to look on, though he said nothing at that moment, and turned and walked silently with us on the other side of the maiden. When we came to the village, I said that we would wait outside until she came back, and thought that Eldred would go along with her. But he stayed with me, and I looked round for a sunny seat where one could see all the long chain of bright hammer ponds that went in steps, as it were, down the valley before us. Nay, he said in a strange voice, come over to the other side of the valley, there is a pleasant place there. The lady will miss us, said I. We need not be long, he said. The place I would show you is not far. One of us can be back before she is done with these churls. So, as I supposed that we might have to wait for half an hour, because every woman in the place would want to tell her ailments to the kindly young mistress most likely, we went together, passing over the brook, and going up the steep valley side beyond it, until we came to the rocks of the old quarry where we had rested before the fight with the outlaws. A pleasant place enough it was, truly, for the rocks stood round in a little cliff, hemming in a lawn of short grass on every side but one, and the trees that hung on the bank of the stream closed that in. So when we were fairly within this circle of red cliff and green trees, Eldred said, "This will do. We will see which of us is to go back to Sexburga." "Why, you will," said I, thinking that he had some device by which he might be free from my presence. "I spoil company for you both, and will go back to the hall by the lower track presently." "You have spoilt company long enough," he said, his face growing very savage of a sudden. "Now I will end it, one way or the other." "What is this foolishness?" I said, seeing now what he meant. "You know well enough," he answered with a great oath. "Pluck out that fine sword of yours and show that you can do more than talk of using it." "Come, Eldred," said I have not deserved this." "You deserve all that I shall give you," he answered, drawing his sword. "Stand up like a man." Now it seemed very hard to me that all these friendships should be broken and spoilt by this foolish business, as they would be if either of us was hurt, and so I tried to quiet him yet once more. "Eldred, listen to reason," I said. "I have done you no wrong. Tell me of what you complain." Thereat he only cursed, bidding me draw and cease prating. "I will not fight you thus," I said, for he was growing over wild to fight well for himself. "Let us find some to attend us and watch the business, that neither of us may be blamed. It is ill to slay a man in a hidden place like this with none to say that the fight was fair." "You are afraid," he said sneeringly. You must ask Ralph if that is likely, said I, for I would not be angered by his angry words. But I do not care to risk blame to you or me. Naught is gained by fighting thus. Ask Ralph, forsooth, he snarled. I care not to hear again how you lay hid in the pit yonder while others fought. Have a care, Eldred, I said then. You grow heedless in your anger, and go too far. I do not think that you mean this. Do you need to be called nidroing, 12? He snarled at me. Now none heard that word pass between us, and though it made me bitterly angry, I kept my wrath back. Truly I began to think that I was foolish to argue with him, but there would be grief, lifelong, at Penhost if deadly harm befell either of us where none could say that all was fairly fought out. Are you not going? He said in a choking sort of way. No, I said, not until I know what all this is about. What good in going over that again, he answered. You know well enough. Let me be you have one. I know, said I, but you have not told me aught. I can only guess that you think that I have taken your place with Sexburga. Aye, and now you have won it. I want it not, I answered. Had you not been so angry you would have known that, when I bid you go back and meet her without me? Now he looked at me with a sort of doubt, and said, in a somewhat halting way, I heard you just now tell her that it could not be that you could think of her as things are. Then I remembered what my last words had been, and I saw that they might easily have misled him after all the trouble he seemed to have had. You heard too much or too little, said I, being minded to laugh, though the matter was over serious to him to let me do so. I spoke of my own troubles, which were the less because my fortunes prevent my thinking of any maiden, seeing that I have no home to give a wife when I find her. You were wrong in thinking that I spoke of Sexburga. I spoke, as you might have known, of the one whom I have lost. How should I know that? I know not of your affairs. Then thought I to myself that I would punish Sexburga, for she had tortured this honest lover of hers overmuch. I will not tell you that tale. Ask Sexburga, who has known it from the first. Then I was sorry for what I had said, for he flushed darkly. I have been made a fool of, he said. Nay, but you should have been more trustful, said I, and now, were I in your place, I would go home to Dollington and bide there for a week, and the maiden will be pleased enough to see you when you return. And if she tries to make you jealous again, seem to mind it not. There is little sport in it for her then. I suppose there would not be, said he, and he began to look more cheerful. Now, said I was betrothed long ago. The wartime has come between me and her who should have been my wife. I have hunted for her and cannot find her, and that is all. Now you understand. It was Sexburga who cheered me in my search, and so I spoke to her thereof. I should not have doubted you, he said frankly, forgive me. I held out my hand and he took it. There was naught but friendliness in his grasp, and I could not blame him. I blamed Sexburga wholly. Then he laughed a little ruefully. I am a fool with a sword, he said. Will you teach me somewhat? I think I was mad when I used those evil words to you. I have forgotten them, I answered, and so I had. One does not think much of what a man says in utmost rage as his. Come, let us go back to the village. So we went back together, but Sexburga had gone on her way homeward without us. Whereat Eldred was not sorry, and said that he was going back to his own place. You will see me no more for a few days, he said. I think your plan is good. Mind this, I answered, I never tried it. Lookers on see best, he answered, laughing bitterly. But think no more of my anger with yourself, I pray you. I told him that I would not, and so we parted good friends enough, though I feared that he might take this matter to heart in such wise that he would have some ill moments presently. There was little spring in his walk as he took the path towards Dollington. I said naught of this affair, as one might suppose, and made little excuse to Sexburga for leaving her. We had walked too far, and had returned too late to find her, I said. She pouted and said nothing, but I thought that her punishment had already begun. Next day there were ships heading in for Pevensey, and I rode away to find out what I could, and forgot Eldred and his troubles. For Olaf had come, and that was luck beyond what I could have looked for. The 10 great ships slid into the haven, and I was first on the strand to meet the king. Wulfnoth and Godwine were riding inland, and doubtless were returning post-haste if they knew that ships had come. But for a little while I had my kinsman to myself, and great was his wonder to find me in this place. I have thought that I should have to ransom you from Knut's hand, he said, for we have heard that Thorkel's men took the queen's ship. Were you not taken likewise?